It started as an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the kind of humid summer day where thunderclouds built slowly over the valley, dark and heavy, hinting at rain, but not yet delivering it. And I was in the garage fixing a faulty breaker when the first low rumbles began echoing across the sky, a warning that the storm rolling in from the west would be no gentle shower. My daughter Lily, 12 years old, wheelchair-bound since birth due to cerebral palsy, had been out front on the ramp sketching in her notepad, something she loved doing whenever the weather allowed. She loved drawing clouds, the way they changed shape, how sunlight glowed around their edges. She always said they looked like angels. I'd built that ramp myself to give her freedom, to let her feel the world beyond the window. And that world, for the most part, had been kind until our HOA president, Karen moved in across the street 6 months ago. From day one, she'd found something to complain about. The ramp being an eyesore, the wheelchair access then lowering the property value, even the small wind chime Lily loved, which she called a noise disturbance. She hid behind rules like a shield, quoting HOA regulations as though they were sacred law, and no one dared challenge her, because she was relentless and loud. That afternoon, she'd already been pacing the cul-de-sac with her clipboard, checking lawns and taking pictures for infractions, wearing that same smug smile that told everyone she was enjoying her power far too much. I'd learned to ignore her. Lily had too, mostly, but as I stepped into the house to grab a wrench, I caught sight of those dark clouds closing in fast and called out, "Lily, you might want to come in soon, sweetheart. Looks like rain." She nodded from the porch, holding up her sketchbook proudly. "Just one more minute, Dad. The light's perfect." She always said that, and normally it would have been fine. Normally, I'd have gone right back to check on her in 5 minutes. But that day, the storm broke faster than anyone expected. Thunder cracked loud enough to rattle the windows, and when the first drops came, they came hard, hammering the roof like nails. I rushed to the front door, ready to pull her inside, but when I swung it open, she wasn't there. Her sketchbook was lying open on the ramp, the pages soaked and curling, but her chair, was gone. At first, I thought maybe she'd rolled herself under the porch awning, but when I stepped out and looked around, I saw nothing but sheets of rain and the flicker of lightning bouncing off wet asphalt. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Lily!" I shouted, my voice almost drowned out by the storm. "Lily, answer me." But there was nothing, just thunder. Panic clawed at my throat. I sprinted off the porch, calling again, scanning the driveways and the street, until through the downpour I saw something, movement near Karen Ellis's yard. She was standing there, umbrella in hand, yelling at someone through the rain, her shrill voice cutting through the thunder. I ran closer, and then I saw it. My daughter's wheelchair. It was tipped sideways, near Karen's hedge, the wheels sunk into the muddy grass, rainwater running down the handles. And Lily, my little girl, was sitting on the ground beside it, crying, soaked through, her small hands trying to pull herself upright, shivering as lightning flashed above. For one frozen second, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then everything inside me ignited. I splashed through the puddles, adrenaline drowning out fear, my voice sharp as I yelled, "What the hell happened?" Karen turned, scowling, as if I were the problem. "Your daughter was blocking the sidewalk," she snapped, her tone so casual it made my skin crawl. She refused to move when I asked her, so I rolled her off to the side. Like she was trash. I could barely hear over the rain, but every word she spoke seared itself into my memory. "You did what?" I shouted, dropping to my knees beside Lily. She was trembling, trying to speak through sobs. I told her I couldn't move fast, Dad. I told her I needed help. She pushed me. My world tilted. Karen actually had the audacity to shrug. "She'll be fine. It's just rain. Maybe next time you'll teach her not to block community access points." My hands clenched so tight, I thought my knuckles would split. Every instinct in me screamed to unleash the kind of fury I hadn't felt in years, but I couldn't not in front of Lily. So I took a deep breath, scooped my daughter up into my arms, and carried her toward the house, shielding her as best I could from the storm. She clung to me, sobbing against my chest, whispering, I was so scared. Daddy, I called, but you didn't come. The guilt hit me like another bolt of lightning. I'm here now, sweetheart, I said softly. You're safe. I've got you. When we got inside, I wrapped her in towels, turned the heater on, and sat with her until she stopped shaking. She was fine physically, just cold, soaked, and terrified, but the look in her eyes broke something inside me. It wasn't just fear. It was confusion. She didn't understand how someone could be so cruel for no reason. Once she was settled and warm, I stepped back outside, rain still pelting down, and walked straight across the street. Karen was still there under her umbrella, snapping pictures of something on her phone, probably evidence for her next HOA complaint. When she saw me coming, she actually smiled. You might want to read the regulations, she said smugly. Sidewalk obstruction, she didn't get to finish. I stopped 2 feet from her, rain pouring down my face, voice low and shaking with restrained rage. You touched my daughter, I said. You left her on the ground in a thunderstorm. You are never, ever to come near her again. She blinked, feigning innocence. You're being dramatic. If you say one more word, I interrupted, I will make sure the police hear exactly how you assaulted a disabled child. And I'll make sure the entire HOA board knows what kind of person you are. For the first time since she'd moved in, she looked unsure, just for a second, but then she scoffed, rolled her eyes, and turned away, muttering, Go ahead. Nobody will believe you. But she was wrong, because I had something she didn't know about. I had cameras. I'd installed them months ago after one too many vandalism coincidences around my property, and one of those cameras had caught the whole thing, from the moment she confronted Lily to when she tipped the wheelchair and walked away. That footage would change everything, but that part, that storm that came after the storm, was still ahead. For now, I walked back into the house, drenched and furious, and sat beside my daughter, watching her sketchbook, drying on the counter, the ink bleeding into swirls of color. I brushed her hair back gently and promised her, quietly but firmly, she will never hurt you again. And in that moment, I meant every word. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean but eerily quiet, the kind of calm that hides a tension just waiting to break again. And as I stepped outside onto the damp porch, the smell of wet grass and earth hit me along with a surge of anger that hadn't faded overnight. It had settled deeper, into something colder and sharper, the kind of calm rage that doesn't shout, it plans. The night before, after getting Lily warm and safe, I'd gone through the security footage from the front cameras, hands trembling not from fear anymore, but from resolve. There it was in perfect clarity, Karen walking up the ramp, arms crossed, lips moving as she lectured my daughter about some so-called HOA rule, and then her grabbing the wheelchair handles and shoving it aside. The moment froze in my mind like a brand. That was all I needed. So, at sunrise, I copied the footage onto a USB drive and printed a few stills. I didn't want revenge, I wanted accountability. By the time Lily woke up, smiling sleepily and asking if she could draw the rainbow outside, I'd already made a plan. You go ahead, sweetheart, I said, kissing her forehead. Daddy's got a meeting to attend. The HOA office was only 3 blocks away, a converted garage behind the community clubhouse that always smelled like coffee and self-importance. And when I walked in, the 3 board members sitting at their folding table looked like they'd seen a ghost. Karen was there too, sipping from her ceramic mug that said, HOA Strong, like it was a badge of honor. She didn't even look up when I walked in. You're not on the agenda today, sir, one of the board members started, but I cut him off, my voice steady. Oh, I think you'll want to hear this. I set my laptop on the table, hit play, and let the footage roll. The room went dead silent. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate. Karen's smug expression cracked for the first time, her color draining as her own image filled the screen. Her voice, her actions, the undeniable truth of what she'd done. One of the board members, a man named Harlan who'd always been too cowardly to cross her, cleared his throat and said, Good Lord, Karen, what were you thinking? She tried to recover, stammering, That's not, it's taken out of context. She was blocking access, and it was just a misunderstanding. I folded my arms, eyes locked on her. A misunderstanding is forgetting to send an email. What you did was assault on a child. She shot up from her chair, face red now, words tumbling out fast. I didn't hurt her. It was raining. I told her move. She refused. She disrespected HOA rules. Harlan turned to her, disbelief hardening his voice. She's 12 years old, Karen, and in a wheelchair. The third board member, an older woman named Diane, looked like she might be sick. You can't talk your way out of this, she said softly. That's not leadership, that's cruelty. Karen opened her mouth again, but I slid a printed still across the table before she could speak. Save it. This is going straight to the sheriff's department and the ADA compliance board. And if you think for 1 second you're going to keep that position after this, think again. For a moment, no one moved. Then, quietly, Harlan said, Mr. Ellis, I think this meeting is over. Karen sputtered something about slander and defamation, but I was already walking out, leaving her shouting behind me. By the time I reached home, the neighborhood grapevine had already done its work. Half the street had heard what happened at the HOA office. It didn't take long for the rest to follow. That afternoon, as I helped Lily adjust the solar lights along the ramp, a few neighbors came by, people who'd always kept their distance before, afraid to be on Karen's bad side. One by one, they apologized. We didn't know. One said, quietly, she's bullied half the neighborhood, but we never imagined she'd go that far. I didn't say much, just nodded, because at that point I didn't want sympathy. I wanted change, and change came faster than I expected. The sheriff's deputy showed up 2 days later, a professional but firm man who'd already reviewed the footage I'd turned in. He asked a few questions, took my statement, and then said, We've spoken to the board. They've suspended Ms. Ellis pending investigation. Those words alone lifted something off my shoulders. Lily was inside drawing again, humming softly like nothing happened, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we could breathe again. But it didn't stop there. Within a week, Karen's control over the HOA began to crumble. The board called an emergency meeting, this time without her, and voted unanimously to remove her from office. They cited gross misconduct and violation of community trust. It was more than political, it was moral. The neighborhood that had once bowed under her arrogance finally stood tall. People started talking to each other again, helping one another, cleaning up shared spaces without threats of fines. The air felt lighter. But for Karen, the fall was swift and ugly. When she realized she'd lost her power, she tried to play the victim, going door to door saying she was misunderstood and that I'd set her up. Unfortunately for her, no one was buying it. Not after they'd seen the video I'd quietly shared with a few concerned residents who'd asked what really happened. The HOA office even released a public statement acknowledging the incident and apologizing to my family. We failed to ensure the safety and dignity of one of our community's most vulnerable members. It read, We are committed to rebuilding trust. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The real satisfaction came the following weekend, when the deputy returned to inform me that the DA's office was reviewing misdemeanor charges against Karen for harassment and reckless endangerment. She's lucky your daughter wasn't hurt, he said grimly. If she had been, we'd be talking felony. I thanked him and watched his cruiser pull away, the weight of weeks finally easing from my chest. That evening, Lily and I sat on the porch watching another storm gather on the horizon, not as fierce as the last, but enough to make the trees sway. She looked up at me, her voice quiet but certain. Daddy, do you think that lady's sorry? I thought for a long moment before answering. Maybe not yet, I said softly, but she will be. Lily nodded and smiled faintly, holding out her sketchbook. She'd drawn a picture of a wheelchair under a rainbow, the words still standing strong, written underneath in her careful looping handwriting. That image would stay with me forever, more powerful than any punishment a court could hand down. Because it wasn't about Karen anymore, it was about resilience, about showing my daughter that even when people are cruel, truth wins when you stand firm. A few weeks later, I got an email from the HOA board's interim president, Diane. She said they were disbanding the compliance patrol Karen had created, removing half the absurd rules she'd enforced, and setting up a community support fund for residents with disabilities or special needs. It's long overdue, she wrote, and you and Lily inspired it. When I showed the message to my daughter, Her smile said everything. From that day on, the ramp that Karen once called an eyesore became a symbol. Neighbors helped decorate it with flowers and solar lights, and during holidays, they hung ribbons on the railings. The whole neighborhood seemed to transform from something rigid and cold into something almost human again. As for Karen, she sold her house a few months later. No one threw a farewell party. The moving truck came and went quietly, and when she drove away for the last time, the rain started falling again, soft, cleansing, like the world was finally washing her out of our story. I watched her taillights disappear down the street and felt no anger, no gloating, just relief. Lily was inside, laughing, her voice mixing with the sound of rain. The world had come full circle, storm to calm, cruelty to compassion, fear to strength. And as lightning flashed in the distance, I thought of all the people who'd stood silent while Karen bullied them, now finally free to speak, to live, to breathe. The storm had broken more than just clouds. It had broken the chains of fear that held an entire community hostage. And all it took was one girl, brave enough to smile through it, and a father who refused to stay silent. The weeks that followed felt like the calm after a storm, but not the kind that fades and leaves things as they were. This was the kind of calm that rebuilds, that lets broken things grow back stronger. Word about what Karen had done spread far beyond our neighborhood. It reached the local news, and soon a small article appeared online titled, "HOA President Removed After Harassing Disabled Child." I didn't seek it out, but people started sending me the link. It wasn't sensationalized or cruel, it simply told the truth. And that truth did something I hadn't expected. It gave people courage. Neighbors from other communities started calling, saying they'd dealt with similar power-hungry HOA members and didn't know they had a right to stand up. Some even asked me how to file formal complaints, how to protect their own families. I found myself writing emails late at night, explaining procedures, offering advice, sharing what I'd learned through all this. It wasn't what I'd planned to do with my life, but it felt like the right thing. Meanwhile, Lily was thriving again. The fear that had haunted her after that night was fading. She was laughing more, painting again, playing with our dog by the porch ramp that the neighbors had helped decorate with fresh flowers. One morning, when the sun was warm and bright, she rolled out onto the ramp and said, "Daddy, I think our house is happy again." I couldn't help but laugh because somehow she was right. The whole place felt alive again, maybe because kindness had replaced fear. A few days later, I was called into a meeting at the county courthouse. I didn't know what to expect, but when I arrived, the assistant district attorney thanked me for my cooperation and said the case had moved forward. Karen had been officially charged with misdemeanor child endangerment and harassment, both carrying fines and probation. She's lucky, the ADA said plainly, because if your daughter had been injured, she'd be facing jail time. I nodded, not because I wanted punishment, but because I wanted her to finally face consequences. Later that week, I got an email from her lawyer offering an apology statement, probably part of a plea deal. It was sterile and rehearsed, but it still mattered. It said, "I deeply regret my actions and the distress I caused to the Ellis family. I understand now that my position in the HOA did not give me the right to act with authority or disregard human compassion." I showed it to Lily, expecting her to be upset, but she surprised me. She just shrugged and said, "Maybe she's learning." That simple, innocent comment hit me harder than anything else. Maybe she was right. Maybe that was enough. In the months that followed, the HOA underwent a complete transformation. The new board dissolved several pointless regulations that had made life miserable for residents, like restrictions on garden sizes or limits on wheelchair ramps and accessibility structures. They even started a volunteer program to help maintain properties for elderly or disabled homeowners who couldn't manage on their own. The neighborhood that once lived under the thumb of one woman's ego became a place of cooperation and community. Every time I saw a neighbor waving as I drove by, I was reminded of how fragile and yet resilient people can be when given a chance to start fresh. But even with peace returning, part of me still struggled with the memory of that storm. The fear in Lily's eyes, the sound of rain pounding the metal of her chair, her tiny voice crying for help in the dark. Sometimes late at night, I'd wake up to thunder and feel my heart race before I remembered she was safe, asleep just down the hall. Healing isn't instant. It comes in quiet moments, little pieces at a time. One afternoon, a few months later, the HOA hosted a neighborhood picnic to celebrate the changes. There were food stands, music, and laughter, things that had been missing for too long. Lily was sitting at a table drawing while a group of kids gathered around her, curious about her artwork. Watching her laugh with them, no trace of fear in her eyes, was worth more than any victory I could ever claim. Diane, the new HOA president, approached me with a smile. You know, she said, if it weren't for you, we might still be trapped in that woman's dictatorship. I shook my head. It wasn't me. It was everyone who finally said enough. She nodded. Maybe so. But it takes one person to light the match that burns down the fear. Her words stuck with me. That night, as the sun set and the sky turned gold, I sat on the porch with Lily. She was holding her sketchbook again, this time drawing a scene of our house with the ramp, the flowers, and a rainbow overhead. It's not just a house anymore, she said softly. It's a home. And she was right. Because home isn't just where you live. It's where you're safe, where people stand up for you, where storms pass and leave strength behind. I looked at her and said, you know, I think that rainbow's our new mascot. She giggled. Then we should paint one on the ramp. And the next weekend, that's exactly what we did. Neighbors came to help. Some brought brushes, others paint. And by the time we finished, the ramp was a bright splash of color visible from the end of the street. People started calling it Lily's Ramp. It became a symbol of everything we'd been through and how we'd come out stronger. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail from the county's Office of Disability Services. They'd seen the story and wanted to feature Lily's Ramp in a community awareness campaign about accessibility and kindness. I read the letter out loud to her, and she gasped with excitement. We're going to be in a poster, she said, eyes wide. You are... I smiled because you showed everyone what real strength looks like. When the campaign launched, I took her to the community center to see the poster. It showed a photo of her smiling by the rainbow ramp with the words, "Kindness builds the strongest communities." She looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "I like that." I stood there quietly, my chest tight with pride and gratitude. The whole journey, from fear to justice, from darkness to light, had come full circle. I realized that while Karen's cruelty had started this chain of events, it wasn't her story anymore. It was Lily's. It was ours. And maybe in some strange way, that night's storm had given the neighborhood a chance to remember what compassion looked like. Months later, I heard Karen had moved out of state. I didn't care where. I just hoped she'd learn something. I didn't wish her harm. I just didn't want her to hurt anyone else. Sometimes the best revenge isn't payback, it's peace. It's living well despite the pain someone tried to cause you. And that's exactly what we did. Life returned to normal, or maybe a better version of it. Lily joined an art class downtown, started showing her drawings at community fairs, and made more friends than she'd ever had before. One evening, as I tucked her in, she asked, "Daddy, are storms always bad?" I smiled at the question, thinking of the one that had changed everything. "No, sweetheart," I said. "Some storms just clear the air so new things can grow." She smiled sleepily. "Then I like storms now." I kissed her forehead and turned off the light, feeling that peace settle deep inside me. The next morning, the sun came through her window, landing on the rainbow ramp outside. It gleamed like a promise, a reminder that kindness, once planted, can never be washed away, and that even when the world turns cruel, the smallest act of courage can turn an entire community around. In the months that followed, the world seemed to take on a gentler tone, as if even the wind had decided to stop shouting for a while and listen instead. The neighborhood, once divided by HOA meetings, rules, and unspoken resentments, now looked alive. Lawns full of children's laughter, open windows carrying music and conversation, and the sound of cooperation instead of confrontation. It was strange, standing in the same place where anger and control had once ruled. Now, watching people come together like they'd been waiting all along for permission to be kind, every time I stepped outside, I noticed how even the smallest things had changed. The way neighbors waved when they drove by, the small gifts left on our porch from people who'd once avoided eye contact, the quiet apologies tucked into gestures rather than words. I didn't need to hear them say they were sorry for not standing up earlier. I already knew they felt it. And truth be told, I wasn't angry anymore. The anger that had once sat like a stone in my chest had softened, replaced by a strange kind of understanding. Sometimes people don't act because they're cruel, they act because they're afraid. Afraid of authority, afraid of conflict, afraid of what happens when you stand out. But fear loses its power when someone else breaks the silence first. That was what Lily had taught me without even knowing it. That courage isn't loud or dramatic, it's quiet, persistent, and made of love. Watching her adjust back to normal life was like watching a garden grow after being scorched. She had nightmares at first, waking in the middle of the night when thunder rumbled, but each time we talked it through. She started keeping a journal where she drew pictures of storms, not as monsters, but as beautiful, swirling skies filled with color. I don't want to hate the rain, she told me one morning. I want to make it pretty again. And somehow she did. The first time a real thunderstorm rolled in months later, she sat by the window instead of hiding, her hand resting calmly on her service dog's head. "It's not scary anymore," she whispered. That simple sentence broke something open inside me because she wasn't just healing, she was teaching me how to, too. Around that same time, Diane, the new HOA president, asked if I'd be willing to join the board. At first, I laughed. After everything that happened, you think I want to sit in those meetings? But she smiled knowingly. That's exactly why you should. Because if decent people don't take the seats, someone like Karen always will. Her words stayed with me, and eventually I said yes. The first meeting I attended was surreal, sitting in the same community center where Karen once ruled with fear, now surrounded by people who wanted to make things better. Instead of fines and enforcement, we talked about community projects, accessibility upgrades, and building a covered bus stop for the kids. The vote passed unanimously. I walked home that night under a calm, star-filled sky, realizing that sometimes the best way to fight corruption isn't to destroy the system, but to rebuild it with honesty. Meanwhile, Karen's name became little more than a cautionary tale. I'd occasionally overhear her mentioned by new residents who didn't know the full story. "Wasn't there some scandal here a while back?" Someone would ask, and an older neighbor would reply, "Yeah, but things are better now. We've got real people in charge." No one needed to say her name. She'd become the ghost of what we'd left behind. But sometimes I wondered about her, not with bitterness, but with a strange curiosity. What happens to someone when their own need for control destroys everything they built? Last I heard, she'd moved to another state, taken a quiet job, and stayed out of neighborhood politics entirely. Maybe that was her own kind of healing. Maybe she learned that power doesn't come from rules, it comes from decency. One crisp autumn morning, about 6 months after the storm, I got a call from the school. They were organizing a Community Heroes Day and wanted Lily to be a guest speaker. "She's inspired a lot of people," the principal said. We thought hearing her story would mean something. I asked Lily what she thought, and she smiled shyly but said, "Only if you come with me." The day of the event, she rolled up to the small auditorium in her bright purple wheelchair, the one we'd customized together with the rainbow decals we'd painted on the ramp. The kids clapped as she came on stage. She started talking softly about kindness, bravery, and standing up even when you're scared. Her voice trembled a little at first, but as she went on, she grew stronger. "Sometimes people forget how to be nice," she said, "but you can remind them." The applause that followed was thunderous. I sat in the audience, eyes stinging, realizing that my little girl, once a frightened child caught in the rain, had become the voice of something far bigger. Afterward, a reporter asked for a brief interview. They didn't focus on the HOA drama or the legal mess. They focused on the message: compassion over control, love over fear. The article was titled "Lily's Light: How One Girl Helped a Neighborhood Heal." I framed it and hung it in our hallway. Life began to move forward with a kind of steady rhythm. I'd wake up early, make coffee, walk the dog, and check the garden we'd planted together behind the house. Lily had painted small stones with bright colors and words like hope, brave, and grow, placing them between the flowers. Sometimes, when I caught the sunlight glinting off them, I thought about how much we'd changed, not just us, but everyone. The family that once complained about noise now hosted neighborhood movie nights. The couple who'd been too shy to talk before now helped organize charity drives. And every year, on the anniversary of that storm, the community gathered, not to remember the pain, but to celebrate how far we'd come. They called it the Rainbow Day. We'd hang colorful streamers, serve homemade food, and watch kids play in sprinklers. It wasn't about erasing what happened. It was about proving that even the worst storms can give birth to something beautiful. During one of those gatherings, Diane approached me again. You know, she said, handing me a cup of lemonade, you could have left this neighborhood after what happened. Most people would have. I nodded. Yeah, I thought about it. So, why didn't you? She asked. I looked over at Lily, laughing with her friends near the painted ramp. Because this is where she learned what strength really means, I said quietly. And I wanted her to see what happens when good people don't give up. Diane smiled. Then maybe that's what real leadership looks like. That night, when the crowd dispersed and the last lanterns dimmed, Lily and I sat outside watching the stars peek through the clouds. Do you think people change, Addie? She asked. Yeah, I said after a moment. Sometimes they need a storm to show them how. She nodded thoughtfully, then added, I'm glad ours is over. I looked at her smile peaceful, her eyes bright, and thought it's not over, sweetheart. It's just beginning. Because what she didn't know yet was that the story wasn't just about us anymore. It had become something bigger, something that touched everyone who heard it. People from other towns started reaching out, asking how to make their neighborhoods more accessible, how to stand up to unfair HOAs, how to turn conflict into community. Lily's rainbow ramp had become a symbol far beyond our little cul-de-sac. A local artist even painted a mural downtown showing a rainbow arching over a stormy sky with the words kindness wins. Every time we passed it, Lily grinned and said, That's my rainbow. And in a way, it was, because that single act of courage, that single night of pain, had rippled outward in ways we could have never imagined. I realized then that sometimes life hands you storms not to break you, but to hand you the tools to rebuild something better. And as I tucked Lily into bed that night, listening to the faint roll of thunder in the distance, I no longer felt dread. Instead, I felt gratitude. For the rain, for the lessons, for the second chances. The storm that once terrified us had become our teacher. Years passed, yet the memory of that storm never left completely. It simply softened. Like distant thunder fading into a lullaby you almost forget is there. Life had changed in every way that mattered. Lily was now 13, her curls longer, her laugh deeper, her courage untouched by time. The rainbow ramp outside our home had become a local landmark. People still slowed their cars when they passed it. Some taking pictures, others leaving small stones painted with words like love, unity, and brave. The neighborhood that once hid behind fences now flourished as a true community, open doors, shared meals, and neighbors who knew each other's names. On weekends, the smell of barbecue and fresh-cut grass replaced the stiff quiet that used to define our street. The HOA, now entirely volunteer-led, had shifted focus from rules to service. They organized cleanups, helped elderly residents repair roofs, and even hosted disability awareness workshops inspired by Lily's story. What had once been a breeding ground for control had turned into a haven for compassion. I still chaired the accessibility committee, and every meeting began with the same reminder: we're here to help, not to police. People took it to heart. It amazed me how simple kindness could rebuild what fear had broken. Lily herself had become something of a local celebrity, though she never sought the spotlight. Her artwork, vibrant and full of color, began appearing at county fairs and school exhibits. She had an eye for turning ordinary moments into hope, a window reflecting rain light, a dog shaking off water under a porch, a pair of hands holding an umbrella for someone else. Each painting carried the same signature at the bottom, Ellis, and each one seemed to whisper the same message. Storm's End, one of her pieces, a watercolor titled After the Rain, even won a regional award and hung in the town library. When we went to see it on display, she looked up at me with quiet pride. "It's weird," she said, "how something that hurt so much can make something beautiful later." I nodded. "That's how growth works, kiddo." She grinned. "Then I guess we're gardeners." We laughed, but she was right. The whole neighborhood had become a garden, each person planting seeds of kindness where weeds of cruelty once grew. It wasn't until the 5th anniversary of that storm that I realized how far we'd come. The HOA decided to hold a special celebration that year, not just Rainbow Day, but a full-on community fair. Booths lined the street, crafts, homemade food, music from a local band. The county sheriff's department even sent a patrol car so kids could explore and learn about real law enforcement, the kind that protects, not intimidates. Julia, now retired from the Marshal Service, volunteered to help organize safety demonstrations for families. I watched her teach kids how to identify real officers and what to do if they ever felt unsafe. It struck me how full circle it all felt. The very badge that had once scared off 2 imposters was now a symbol of trust and education. During the fair, a young couple approached me with their toddler son. The father said, "We moved here because of your story. We wanted to raise our boy in a place where people actually look out for one another." I didn't know what to say. All I could manage was, "Welcome home." Later that evening, as lanterns lit up the dusk, Diane took the small stage set up at the end of the cul-de-sac. 5 years ago, she began, "A terrible night reminded us what happens when fear rules, but one family and one little girl showed us that compassion is stronger than any storm." She gestured toward Lily, who blushed as the crowd clapped. I watched her roll forward shyly, waving to everyone, her smile glowing in the soft light. When the applause quieted, she spoke into the microphone. "My dad always says storms don't last forever. And he's right. But sometimes they come back to check if you remember what you learned. I hope we always do." Her words settled over the crowd like a benediction. Some people wiped tears, others simply smiled, nodding. I felt something inside me unwind, a final knot of pain releasing. As the night deepened, fireworks began crackling above the horizon. Reflections of color shimmered across wet pavement from a light drizzle that had started halfway through the show. No one ran for cover this time. Instead, umbrellas opened, laughter rose, and children danced in the gentle rain. I looked at Lily, her face lit by bursts of gold and blue in the sky. "Still scared of storms?" I teased. She laughed, shaking her head. "Not anymore. They're just the sky, getting excited." Her answer made me laugh too, but it also made my throat tighten, because she'd turned fear into wonder, something even grown-ups rarely manage. Julia slipped her hand into mine, and together we watched our daughter laugh under the soft rain, surrounded by neighbors who'd once been strangers. When the fair ended and the last booths closed, the 3 of us walked home through the quiet street. The rainbow ramp gleamed faintly under the streetlight, still bright after all these years. We stood in front of it for a moment, taking it in. "It needs a new coat of paint," Julia said softly. "Yeah," I nodded. "But maybe we let the neighborhood kids do it this time." Lily smiled. "Can we make it bigger? Maybe with sparkles?" Julia chuckled. "You're the artist, honey. It's your rainbow." Lily yawned, leaning her head against my arm. Then I wanted to shine. And I knew she didn't just mean the paint. The next morning, half the neighborhood showed up with brushes, paints, and coffee. Even the mayor stopped by briefly to thank Lily for reminding our town what community looks like. We let the kids choose the colors this time: purples, teals, golds. And by afternoon, the ramp sparkled just like Lily had imagined. When it dried, someone added a small sign at the base that read, "Built by many hands, for all hearts." Standing there, watching sunlight reflect off the glittering paint, I realized that the rainbow wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to everyone who had decided to be better than they were. That evening, as twilight fell, I sat on the porch with Julia while Lily painted in her sketchbook. The air smelled like rain and pine. You ever think about what would have happened if we'd moved away? Julia asked quietly. I thought for a long moment before answering. Yeah, but then we wouldn't have seen this. I gestured to the street where kids were still running, where laughter carried on the wind. Sometimes you have to stay in the place that hurt you just long enough to heal it. She nodded. I'm glad we did. Silence settled between us, comfortable and full. From inside the house came the faint hum of Lily's favorite song, a melody she'd been humming since the day we repainted the ramp. The notes mingled with the sound of crickets, the whisper of leaves, the soft pulse of life returning to normal. Later that night, after Julia went inside, I stayed on the porch alone, looking up at the sky. A few clouds drifted across the moon, and for a moment I thought I heard distant thunder again, but it didn't scare me. It sounded almost like applause, maybe from a universe itself, echoing approval for a story that had finally found its peace. I thought about how every decision we make, every act of kindness or cruelty, ripples outward in ways we'll never fully see. Karen's choices had once brought pain, but they'd also indirectly created this community of light. And that realization didn't make me bitter, it made me grateful. Because if darkness can create light, then no storm is ever wasted. I whispered a quiet thank you to life, to grace, to second chances, and then went inside to check on Lily one last time. She was asleep, her sketchbook open on the nightstand, a new drawing half finished. It showed a rainbow stretching across a calm sky, with words written underneath in her careful handwriting. No storm lasts forever. I stood there for a long time, the room lit only by moonlight, and smiled. Outside, the rainbow ramp glowed faintly, catching the silver of night. It wasn't just paint, it was a promise, one that would outlast us all.